Okay, so this is a science video. I haven't done too many of these because they're all on slideshows, but I'm just going to talk through some things. This is the review of the environmental chem unit, and I'll probably go back and do the other two slideshows that I did as well. The three basic points to this unit is number one, the environment is made up of chemicals that can support or harm living things. Number two, the quantity of chemicals in the environment can be monitored. And three, potentially harmful substances are spread and concentrated in the environment in various ways. So this is obviously from a Pear Deck slideshow. So we'll just skip this slide and we'll skip this one. However, you can take a look and decide for yourself which of the guinea pigs you are feeling like today. All right, so topic one, the environment is made up of chemicals that can support or harm living things. The key concepts are that chemicals are essential to life. We also talk about organic and inorganic material. Organic material or compounds are ones that contain carbon, and inorganic do not have carbon in them. We're very simply organizing material at this point. When you do later chem courses, it'll be a lot more complicated. We're also going to talk about acids and bases, and then the ingestion and absorption of materials in both plants and animals. And the last section is on substrates and nutrients. Now, again, this is review, so you should have learned some of this before. We're not going to touch on everything, but if there's any of those that you kind of say, I'm not sure what that's talking about, you're going to want to go back and look at topic one in the textbook and maybe do some reading or ask me some questions. So, first thing is the nitrogen cycle. What is the most common way that nitrogen fixation occurs? So, there's some options for you, but we're going to see it's nitrogen fixing bacteria. There's a bunch of different options. There's also fertilizer. If we look back, can I go back? Oops, crap. I can't go back in that. But bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria is the answer to that question. Multiple choice question. If soil lacks nitrogen, farmers can add fertilizer or plant these. And the answer is nitrogen fixing plants. So the options were given in the Pear Deck, but if you can see up in the top right hand corner, there's clover. Clover or alfalfa can also fix nitrogen, so that's an option for farmers to increase the nitrogen in the soil. What do the three numbers on a bag of fertilizer represent? So the numbers on a bag of fertilizer represent the percentage of, and you can find this in your textbook, and I just want to get them in the right order because it matters, makes a difference. It is the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now you'll notice they don't add up to 100. That's because there's all sorts of other things in that fertilizer. So yes, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's their percentage within that package. There might also be some other material in there. Often there's material to help aerate the soil. There's just dirt in there. But in terms of growing plants, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are very important. And depending on what you want your plants to look like, if you want flowers, or if you want them to be tall, or if you want it to be very green, you would play with that ratio. You can see the names on the bags that depends on what they're doing. Multiple choice questions. Materials which can harm living things and do not occur naturally in the environment are called, dun, dun, dun. Now this was a multiple choice question as well that we do not see the answers. But the answer was, it was pollutants, okay? Alrighty, I'm going to follow along so I can see exactly what's going on because I am jumping and guessing, and that's not going to help you guys really when you look at this. Now, we're talking here a little bit about solid wastes and sanitary landfills. It is a section of the unit Sanitary landfill sites, so this is where we would put our solid waste garbage, are built to prevent waste chemicals from moving through the soil. As rainwater and as rainwater or groundwater moves through waste, it can dissolve some items. Which features do landfill sites have to prevent these solutions from entering the soil and groundwater? So there's a little thing to answer there. And landfills often have a plastic lining as well as packed clay, very tightly packed clay, to prevent solutions from leaching out of the soil and entering the groundwater. Okay, so that's what that answer is for that question. I just want to go back. I just want to make sure I have, pollutants was the answer to that question. All right, let's see the next one. Wastewater and sewage treatment. Wastewater containing dissolved and undissolved materials from your home is called sewage. It moves through the pipes into a septic system or sewage treatment plant where the waste is treated. So it really depends on how big it is. Most urban centers are going to send your material to a sewage treatment plant. But out in farmland, whatever, you might have your own septic system that would that your sewage would flow through. Now, the treated water that is returned back into the lakes or rivers is called effluent. So that treatment removes most of the wastes. Now, if the sewage system can't handle a large quantity of rainwater, that water might go directly into a river or lake through storm sewers. And that water may also contain chemicals washed off the street. So it's really important to note that you might have some materials in your sewer system. Okay, that, especially if you have a really heavy rain and there's at the end of spring, when there's like in spring when we get all that rain and there's all that dirt and stuff on the roads from winter treatment because we put stuff on the roads for driving, that can get washed into our release back into lakes or rivers. And that's why a lot of people were really resistant to putting salt on the roads, because that can affect the acidity and the salinity of the water. Name 3 sources that can increase the amount of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides in the atmosphere. Okay, so think about that. Well, there's forest fires, there's volcanoes, and there's burning fossil fuels, human activities including transportation and industry, etc. So those are 3 sources. Transportation, industry, electrical power production, that's going to increase those carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere. All right. Acids and bases. An acid is a compound that dissolves in water to form a solution with a pH lower than 7. The pH number indicates its acidity. It is the measure of the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. Industrial processes and fuel combustion produce a large quantity of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides, which combine with water to form acids, and this leads to acid rain. A base is a compound that dissolves in water to form a solution with a pH higher than 7. Bases, their pH range is 7 to 14, and if you look at the little chart, acids are 0 to 7, so they're lower, and 7 is neutral. Okay, what is the name of the reaction that happens when you mix acids and bases? Any ideas? Dun, dun, dun. It would be a neutralization. Okay, we've neutralized it. So we're neutralizing it, so at the end it should have a pH of 7. Okay. And the neutralization reaction will produce, if you can see in that little diagram there, a water and an ionic salt. We're not talking table salt, we're talking an ionic salt. An ionic salt has a metal ion and a non-metal ion. So that's produced from that acid-base neutralization reaction. Okay. All right, question for you, multiple choice question. Toothpaste has a pH of 10. So toothpaste is, your answers are, current options are neutral, a base, a strong acid, or an acid-base indicator, or corrosive. With a pH of 10, it's greater than 7, so it would be a base. Okay, all righty, let's look at this. 1.3, common substances essential to living things. So we've got organic and inorganic compounds. Organic compounds contain carbon, while inorganic compounds do not. Organic compounds far outnumber the inorganic compounds and can be very complex. Depending on how their molecules are arranged, they make up the complex molecules that form sugar, starch, fat, oil, wax, and proteins. Now, all living things need nutrients to survive. Here's your question. What are some of the 6 macronutrients that humans need in large amounts? Okay, so let's find out. They need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and sulfur. Now, remember, when we're eating these, we're not eating the elemental materials. We're eating them in compounds. So we're not eating a big pile of yellow, stinky sulfur. It's going to be in a compound, so it's going to be bonded with other elements when we consume it, okay? We wouldn't want to just eat the elemental materials. We want them in these more complex organic compounds, okay? Those are the macronutrients. We also need micronutrients. So there's materials we need in very, very small amounts. And for those of us who are not good about eating properly, we might want to consider taking a multivitamin. Testing for organic molecules. So this is a matching task. So it's to match those 4 indicators in column A with the substance they test for in column B. So it's just drawing a line to connect them. So let's take a look. So Benedict Solution tests for glucose. Iodine tests for starch. Brown paper can test for fat and oil. And the Biodegration solution will test for proteins. So, and here's how those tests work. So if you're looking for glucose, the Benedict solution turns from blue to yellow, orange, red. So if you look up in that diagram, the blue one has 0% glucose, but the brown one is greater than 4% glucose. So a lot more sugar in there. Iodine solution, it turns from red to brown to blue-black. So often when we're looking for starch, often it'll be like a thing of bread, because bread has starch in it. You put some iodine on the bread and it'll turn blue-black. Fat and oil, if you have brown paper and you put it on fat or oil, it will leave it will allow you to be able to kind of see through. It'll make the brown paper a little transparent. You'll see the oily, fatty spots on the paper. Protein, we use a Biodegration solution that turns from blue to purple to mauve in the presence of protein. It's important to note that these indicators are hazardous substances and must be handled with care. So if we were doing things with them in the lab, we would wear gloves, etc. How organisms take in substances. So plants take in substances using diffusion and active transport. Which one of those 2 requires the plant to expend energy? Dun, 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 dun. Active transport. Active transport requires energy while diffusion does not. This is because diffusion particles spread out from an area of high concentration to low concentration. While in active transport, the plant wants to absorb particles from an area of low concentration into an area of high concentration. So they have to put energy. It's like pushing a rock up a hill, right? So it's like the plant is working against the concentration grade. And the plant needs to expend energy to do it, okay? Please note, osmosis is this name for the specific diffusion of water molecules. So osmosis is still diffusion. It's just talking specifically about water molecules. Alrighty, how are plant roots similar to an animal's intestines and other parts of the animal digestive system? So we got a picture of the two side by side. So just what are some ideas? Well, both a plant's roots and an animal's intestines and digestive system have a great deal of surface area to absorb the maximum amount of nutrients from the substances they take in and eat. Plants' roots have lots of long hair-like tendrils, and the intestines are long and narrow, have tiny hair-like villi inside to absorb materials. The higher the surface area, the more absorption. So both plants and animals maximize their surface area so that they can absorb a lot. Okay, you want to make sure if you eat something that you're going to be able to take as much of the nutrients out of it as possible. Multiple choice question. Fats, oils, and waxes are compounds composed of many carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Animals and plants produce them. These compounds are also known as, well, what's another name? Dun, dun, dun. It could be carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, or butter. They're known as lipids. Sorry, I skipped. And I can't figure out on my iPad how to go back. The last topic in this topic is substrates. And substrates are where an organism lives, will affect how they can obtain nutrients. Substrate is the name for the material on which the organism lives. Some organisms are literally attached to their substrate, like moss growing on a rock or a tree, okay? So the rock and the tree would be the substrate. That's where the moss exists. So which of the following substrates would you expect to find the most organisms living and thriving? So we have a desert, a rainforest, tundra, and the Arctic. Well, I would say it's probably a rainforest. Humidity, heat, lots of food sources. The tundra would be the second choice, but it's often very dry, and that's going to decrease. And then the desert and the Arctic will have very few comparatively. All right, topic 2. The quantity of chemicals in the environment can be monitored. Now, you'll notice I haven't put as much time into this one because just last class, we did a big old journey through topic 2. So, and that slideshow is available for you. Okay, so went in more detail on topic 1 for that reason. So the key concepts in topic 2 are that we're talking about air and water quality, concentration and dispersal, and the uncertainties in environmental monitoring and assessing toxicity and risk. Okay, so what are some ways we can tell if a natural water system is healthy? So just ideas, how can we find that out? So I think we can look at biological indicators and looking at aquatic invertebrates, measuring chemicals in the environment. So we're looking at oxygen and nitrogen, pesticides, toxicity, heavy metals, and the acidity, pH. Okay, so those are different ways that we can take a look to kind of tell if it's healthy. We're going to want lots of microbiological indicators, so lots of small microscopic organisms as well as small aquatic invertebrates. The smaller the organism, the more affected by pollution. Okay, so if there's very few of them, it means that it's polluted water. Okay, we need oxygen, we need nitrogen. We want to make sure there's not very many pesticides and that the toxicity is low. We would not want a lot of heavy metals. And for acidity, we want to make sure that the acidity, that the pH is 5 or greater. Okay, multiple choice question. Correct explanation of this statement. The LD50 is 87 milligrams per kilogram for rats by mouth is, and there's some different options. And our answer is, 50% of the rat test population will survive if given 87 milligrams per kilograms of body weight of DDT. Okay. So if given that 50% will survive, 50% will die. But you have to make sure that it's milligrams per kilogram because it's based on the weight of the organism as well. Okay. So some of these are harder to kind of follow because of the way the pear deck works. What factors affect the amount of dissolved oxygen in water? Temperature, turbulence, the amount of photosynthesis by plants and algae in the water, and the number of organisms using the oxygen. So if we look at the amount of dissolved oxygen, we'll notice that the lower the dissolved oxygen, the fewer organisms in there. If it's 8 parts per million or milligrams per liter, we'll have large number of diverse invertebrates, really, really healthy. At 6, mayflies, stoneflies, and beetles start to disappear. At 4, we have freshwater shrimp, midge larvae, and worms. And then at 2, midge larvae and some worms can survive. So we really want it at least at an 8 for our oxygen. Okay. So here we have our LD50. It's telling me that I need to move this slide. I'm doing some adjustments as I teach this. LD stands for lethal dose. We talked about that before. LD50 is the amount of substance giving all at once per kilogram weight of the organism that will cause 50% of the group of test animals to die. So that's that was a little bit out of order. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, multiple choice question. Although clarity seems to be a good indicator of water quality, there are some problems with this determining water quality. One reason is because clear water can still have harmful acid in it. So we can't take that assumption that if it can't be seen, it's not there. Because there are many things that hide. I mean, acetic acid, it looks like water. Hydrogen peroxide, it's a clear solution, very clear solution. But you drink it, you're gonna die, okay? So clearness is not an indicator of health, okay? All right, topic 3. I told you 2 would be a little shorter because we just did it. Okay, potentially harmful substances are spread and concentrated in the environment in various ways. Key concepts: concentration and dispersal, stability and biodegradability, evidence of toxicity, hazards, probabilities, and risk assessment. So we're looking at now how does pollutants get released and dispersed? How do we stabilize things? How can we remediate? What are the signs that we have a toxic situation? And then how do we kind of analyze with risk assessment and look at the hazards and keep ourselves safe? All right, here we go. Transport of materials through air, soil, and water. So some of the key vocabulary we've looked at with this, we've looked at containment, which is the act of preventing something from moving or spreading. Deposition is the settling out or setting down of a material. Dispersal is the spreading apart or distribution of a material. Emission is the release of a substance from its source. And remediation is the fixing of the problem or putting something back the way it was before the event. Okay? So, multiple choice question: wind speed, prevailing wind patterns, and the chemical properties of the airborne chemical pollutant are factors that determine the pollutants. A, concentration and pH. B, strength and toxicity. C, harmful color. Or D, direction and distance. And the answer is, dun dun dun, it's direction and distance. Okay, the wind, how fast it's going, and what the patterns are, and how heavy the particles are going to determine how far it goes. So that's the distance, and in what direction. Okay. Multiple choice question. When rain lands on the earth, some of it soaks through the soil and moves downward. As it moved, it's dissolved. It dissolves substances in the soil and carries them along. This liquid is called, and our choices are groundwater, osmosis, leachate, and acid rain. It is, leachate. The stuff that seeps out is called leachate. Okay. Pesticides. So there's a bunch of information about pesticides here. We've talked about DDT. We've talked about malaria being a dangerous disease carried by mosquitoes, and that was the reason for DDT. DDT is banned in a variety of countries, but some countries where malaria is prevalent, it's still used there, but under very strict regulations. Now, we haven't talked much about hazard quotient, but it's a calculation used to determine whether exposure to a chemical will harm an exposed individual or ecosystem. So just how dangerous it is. And then a neonicotinoid is a group of broadly used systematic, ecologically persistent pesticides that cause paralysis and death. So obviously, those have to be used carefully. Some other definitions with regards to pesticides. Key terms. Non-selective pesticide is a chemical used to kill pests, but that also will affect non-target organisms. Non-target organisms are the ones that are not the intended victims. They typically kill any organisms they touch. Persistent pesticides are ones that don't break down easily, so they stay in the environment for a long period of time. Pervasive pesticides, they spread widely across the environment and among organisms. So they're not very targeted in terms of where they can go. We know what a pesticide is. It's a chemical used to destroy insects or other organisms that could negatively affect animals and plants. And a systemic pesticide are chemicals used to kill pests that are absorbed into plants and distributed through the whole organism so that every part of the plant becomes toxic to the pests. Okay. Match the following methods of changing concentration of pollutants with their definition. So these were the 5 remediation techniques. How to reduce the concentration. We could use dispersion, dilution, biodegration, phytoremediation, and photolysis. And then we have a number of definitions. So let's take a look on the next page to see what's what. So dispersion is the scattering of a substance away from its source. Dilution is reducing the concentration of a pollutant by mixing it with more air and water. Biodegration is using living things like bacteria to break down pollutants. Phytoremediation is using green plants to reduce the concentration of harmful chemicals in the soil. So we talked about using sunflowers in the Chernobyl site, because the sunflowers would take in a lot of the heavy metals and radiation, and then those plants could be destroyed elsewhere. And then there's photolysis, which is the breakdown of compounds by sunlight. Dun, dun, dun. Multiple choice question. Plants able to absorb and accumulate large amounts of harmful chemicals are grown, harvested, and processed. This technique to reduce soil or groundwater contamination is called, well, we just found that out. It's called phytoremediation. Dun, dun, dun. And it was a multiple choice question, so it had some options. Multiple choice question. Waste can be reduced, recycled, recovered, or reused, but most of it is placed in landfill sites. The most preferred option is to either reuse, reduce, recycle, or recover. The most preferred option is to reduce. The less pollution we have to begin with, the better. Okay, so reducing is always the best way to go. So then you get asked this, and then you can think, these are things you should reflect on. What did you already know? What did you learn more about? What do you need to review? And what will you never forget? I also encourage you to look at the other slideshows and the other notes that I've provided, because I certainly couldn't go through the whole unit in one class. It's kind of just a little encapsulating ideas and to kind of guide you into what you need to look at. Alrighty, and then your assignment. There is a unit review assignment. And then there's some other material I'll be providing you with.